Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we are going to be doing part 1 of day 1 deck lists for the new Timeless format. So I'm brewing up some ideas. Some of the stuff worked for me in the no ban list historic, so I wanted to kind of extend that and build some sideboards. So 4 of these will have sideboards. One of them I think is strictly a... Actually, I'm going to do 6 decks. I forgot about a deck. So you're getting 6 decks today for the price of 5. 5 best of 3, you can kind of play them in best of 1, and then 1 best of 1 deck as well. One thing I will say, this format takes a lot to brew. There's a lot of good cards, and just kind of going through, like every deck could be a Yorion deck because you just want to throw in so many things. But the sideboards are kind of starting point. Obviously, as the meta adapts, you're going to want to change it depending on what you're running into. So we're just going to jump into it. I'll paste all these deck lists so you can get them started. In some cases, I am going to have placeholders for things like the fetch lines, for things like eventually when we get to it, like Treasure Cruise, we'll kind of look at that and kind of go from there. There's certain decks I want to build, like the Tainted Pact deck, but that's all a bunch of one-ofs. Just takes a long time to build it, so we'll figure that out as we go. Again, these are all unproven. These are things I'm going to try out early on and see what works, what doesn't work, and kind of go from there. So the first one up is Timeless Sultai. So going with a Sultai Midrange deck. This one here, you can actually play Jengantha Companion from what I see. Pretty much, yeah. So you could play Jengantha Mainboard Companion if you'd like. The kind of concept here is leveraging broken Sultai things. So we have Oko, Thief of Crowns, probably one of the most powerful planeswalkers ever, banned in a whole bunch of formats. Pairing that with Uro, gains you life, draws you cards, puts your lands into play. We have addition of Delighted Halfling, which makes our legendaries uncounterable. So we can go Halfling into turn 2 Oko or Uro, or even Tyvar, and then mill and find some other goodies. Tyvar also gives haste to both the Delighted Halfling and Deathrite Shaman. They laughed at me when I crafted these for Historic to kind of play around with, but now who's laughing? Deathrite's very good in a fetch land format between both players' decks. You can eat away at the graveyard. It's also graveyard hate for instant sorceries and creatures. So you can deal with your opponent's Uros, Okos, everything like that. So I think this card is very well positioned. So you have Mana Dorks, kind of interaction, uncounterable. Fatal Push gets really good in this format because you have a lot of fetch lands. So another way to enable Revolt. Thoughtseize, obviously, as hand hate. Memory Lapse. I'm going Memory Lapse over Counterspell because it's easier on the mana. And I like the tempo element of it to kind of kind of screw up your opponent's draws. We're kind of a tempo control mid-range keyword soup. Bitter Triumph is something I want to try out here, so don't necessarily care about the 3 life. The discard could be advantageous at times with discarding, for example, one of our creatures to bring back with Tyvar, or just discarding an Uro that you can escape back later. But I wanted something main board that could answer an opponent's Planeswalker, while also just being an incidental removal spell. Bowmasters, the original printing, very, very powerful card. We're going to punish opponents for drawing cards. And then Drown in the Loch, fetch lands kind of fuel the graveyard. So this kind of gets cheaper in terms of activating as both a removal spell and counter spell. And then lastly, I want to try out Vraska. So Vraska, while being 4 mana, synergizes with a lot of things. So the +1, we're making a lot of food tokens that can be sacrificed, extra lands, whatever it may be. We can sacrifice the army tokens from Bowmaster, gets us some card draw. The -3, these formats, there's going to be a lot of Lurrus decks. It hits Blood Moon, just a lot of permanents that the minus can hit. So I just like it as kind of a utility walker in this kind of mid-range shell. I don't want to go higher on the curve. I'm afraid of playing it into counter spells, so opting to not go there. Mana base, so some utility lands, Hall the Storm Giant, Otawara. One thing you're going to want is make sure that you can facilitate, especially in non-red decks, having one of each basic. And if you see your opponent is kind of hedging on like a mono red or Ponza style strategy, you want to aggressively like fetch for your basics, just to make sure you have your colored mana in place. Seju in here, you have your duels that can be fetched here. I'm opting to not play the everything I want in this deck is untapped lands, and my deck's basically green-black, so I'm not playing the other fast lands. I'm just playing Blooming Marsh as my fast land. I don't want Zagoth Triome, I think it's the name. And then I'm playing 6 fetch lands. So Polluted Delta's in the format, which then can fetch, and then just 2 off-color fetches, whatever it may be, Wooded Foothills, doesn't really matter, just to be able to fetch your other colors. So to have 6 fetch lands in the deck. The sideboard that I'm starting off with, and there's a lot of ways we can build this different, but an additional kind of discard effect in Duress, just to have 1 more in here against like the control matchup. Zone of Eric versus like Yawgmoth, any sort of sack decks. I don't know how prevalent that's going to be, but it also just backs up as Graveyard Hate if needed. Unlicensed Hearse is the other Graveyard Hate. I wanted to try out Bitter Blossom against like the control decks. I think Blue-White will probably have some presence, or Jeskai control. Just another recurrent, like constant threat. So I want to see how this plays out in the deck itself. Noxious Grasp I think is really good because it can deal with 3 mana Teferi, can deal with Oko, can deal with Uro, can deal with 5 mana Teferi. Just a lot of threats in the format. Maelstrom Pulse is catch-all removal, but probably can just be shifted to like anything else in place. I don't know how much we want a sweeper necessarily. I think with Uro and Oko we're good against aggro, but we'll see from there. Theracinder, Artifact Enchantment Hate, that can scale. Bind to Secrecy, we're playing an alchemy card, but the more I think of this, I'm actually just going to play Mystical Dispute. I think it's better. So I'm just going to play some disputes in here. I think it's better there. Virulent Plague is actually for Field of the Dead. You just eliminate all their tokens. I think this is reasonable here. I want to try that out. I think people will be excited to play Field. Ashiok shuts off any kind of tutor effects. So it gets you some value there. Also just incidentally mills and Graveyard Hate. And then Unmoored Ego for any kind of combo decks. You can name like key cards, like if it's Storm or stuff like that. You're seeing a lot of Storm. You can play Weather the Storm in place. Like there's this, with these bigger formats, you really need to tailor it to the meta. But that's kind of how I'm approaching it there. The next deck up is, we'll start with this one here. So this is the deck that I did. At one point I was 20-0 with a variation of this deck in No Ban Historic Best of 1. So it's Timeless Red Blood Moon. So Blood Moon turns all non-basics into mountains, so it really punishes greedy mana bases. This is kind of a mono red mid-rangey kind of shell. Dragon Rage Chandler in here. Original printing becomes a 3/3. Lightning Bolts, Swift Spear. We have Ragavan in here. In all honesty, Swift Spear might come out as we play more games. We'll see how the format evolves. I had this as an Abosh list originally, but I wanted to have sideboard options. I might consider like other cards in place here, but we'll see how it starts off with Swift Spear as another aggressive 1-drop that kind of scales as you go. I like Spikefield Hazard. There's a lot of 1 toughness, like hitting a Bowmaster, hitting your opponent's Dragon Rage, hitting their Ragavan, all important kind of hits. So I like that at 1 mana, especially because we have a lot of ways to draw cards. Unholy Heat scales to deal up to 6 damage. Fairly easy to turn on Delirium in this deck, especially with fetch lines. Bonecrusher Giant breaks the ring's protection, deals with early creatures, and then Reasonable Body. Fable, again, just make your creatures shape up your hand. In matchups where Blood Moon's not good, you want to get rid of it, so that's the way to do it. And then Seasoned Pyromancer for card advantage. And then I like Doxagonus a lot. You're often churning through your deck a lot, so throwing this into the graveyard, getting it back for 2 mana is reasonable. I fixed the mana base because now we have fetches, so I'm going to play fetches because it helps turn on Delirium and then thins out our deck. We really only want to get to like 3 to 4 mana and then kind of go from there. Playing Fiery Islet as just a card draw advantage went down to 2 runes, in part because we're Blood Moon, so it often shuts it off. Same with the Den of the Bugbear. The sideboard that I'm going with is Burning Hands as a way to deal with Uro and Oko. Normally you'd play Fry or Rending Volley, but we need to scale up to deal 6 damage. So I'm opting to try out Burning Hands in this place. Like I said, the Fry's in here for Teferis and going around, any sort of like Angels, stuff like that. Roiling Vortex for the more aggressive matchups. Kind of get them that way there. Soul Guide Lantern for Graveyard Hate, a Brotherhood's End for any sort of go-wide strategies, Field of the Dead, Rampaging Ferocidon for the Field of the Dead matchup, and then Chandra for the Grindier matchups. I didn't want to go to Chandra 6 because we're only playing 22 lands in the deck. Then Timeless Control. So you can go Yorion, you can go without Yorion. The one thing I wanted to try to do was not just throw every counter spell in the deck, because Teferi Time Raveler being a resolved card from your opponent will cause you headaches. But I went with a Memory Lapse to counterspell version. Again, I like Memory Lapse more from a tempo element, because you kind of screw them up, like if they're missing line drops or stuff like that. Swords to Plowshare is legal, so full 4 of that. Divine Purge, as well as Supreme Verdict as sweepers. Divine Purge is one of the few alchemy cards I think that we'll see play. Being a sweeper for 3 mana, very useful. Just a couple Archmage Charms because we have cheaper counters. 2 Snapcaster Mages. I didn't want to go heavy on Snapcaster because of the fairies. Lorien Revealed. And with this Lorien version, so I'm actually playing some fetch lands, and I'm doing Lorien Revealed as well as the fetch lines. And then because there's I forget what the blue-white one is called, but I can play the Ragavan Triome, Spira's Headquarters, or Fiend's Tower and basically get Domain activated, so using the Leyline Binding as a cheap removal spell. So we would effectively have 8 1-mana answers in the deck. Shark Typhoon's in here, and then 2 Teferis. The one thing I also want to try, because like we're playing 28 Lions in this deck, which I think is reasonable, because you're going to be mana hungry, especially with fetches, you can kind of thin it out, but Field of the Dead, I think, is super reasonable. You're naturally playing a bunch of different lands, so you can turn on the field pretty easy and kind of go from there. The one thing you can actually do is place a snow-covered island. The snow islands themselves will count as basically a different land type, even though they're basic, so it gets around Blood Moon. The way I built this deck was to have access to 3 blue basics and 1 plains. The way I kind of think about it, though, we may actually want to change that slightly and actually go up a snow plains, just to have access to, let's do snow plains, because we need double white at times for some of our spells. I basically want to have it that when we know we're playing against Blood Moon, we have access to fetch our mana base to protect us against Blood Moon to cast our spells. Field of Ruins in here to blow up like opponent's fields or creatures, then utility lands kind of mixed in. The card that I'm omitting from here is Brainstorm. It might be sacrilegious, but at the end of the day, we're only playing 4 fetches, and I honestly am more concerned with the amount of Bowmasters going around than the actual Brainstorms being effective. I might be overthinking it, and Brainstorm should come in, but I am going to hedge on not playing into Bowmaster pinging me for 3 every time I try to draw cards. So that's the way I'm approaching it. I could be wrong, but that's the way I want to kind of think of it. My sideboard plan for the control mirrors is to just play 2 more Field of the Deads on the side. I actually am entertaining this kind of sideboard approach for decks. I think it's reasonable, especially when between fetches and all the different color lands. Just a redundant way to kind of play these kind of effects. Stern Scolding for the more, like for the cheap decks, Lurrus decks, stuff like that. Aether Gust, red-green decks, Uro, Oko, everything like that. Veto for the control mirrors. Get Lost, I wanted a white removal spell that hit Planeswalkers. Rest in Peace for Graveyard Hate. And then Farewell, Verdict, just more sweepers. Another Shark Typhoon, and March of the Otherworldly Light. Looking at this, I can probably play... I'm probably going to play 2 Disputes instead. We're learning this format as we go along. I think I do want to have access to Disputes, because like you never want a Teferi to resolve against you. So I think that's how I'm going to start with this deck here. Kalim is a card from Alchemy that could be considered as well. There's a lot of different ways to kind of look at it in that respect. So we did that. We will go to Timeless Shadow. So this is Death Shadow, and this is going to be a Lurrus Shell. You can try Grixis. I started with Grixis, and honestly, there's so many cards I want to play in here. But Lurrus Companion, Death Shadow cares about your life being low. We have fetches that lower our life, and we have shocks that lower our life. Also playing a couple of the Sunbaked Canyon Silent Clearing. We don't have the red-black version, so playing these off colors. Again, keeping enough basics that at least a swamp that I play around Blood Moon. Mishra's Bauble, cheap way to enable Delirium or Revolt, along with the fetch lands, Fatal Push, 6 discard spells, Inquisition and Thoughtseize, Dragon Rage Chandler, Lightning Bolts, Ragavans, Unholy Heats again in here, Bowmaster. I'm playing 2 Arcanists. I wanted to keep my curve really low, and then Croxa as well. It might be right to play more Arcanists, but we'll see how it kind of plays out in practice. I'm already pretty low on lands. I wanted to have a lot of interaction, both hand hate and removal kind of mixed into there. The sideboard, Bitter Triumph, same idea, deal with Planeswalkers, Noxious Grasp as we mentioned, go blank for hand hate and graveyard hate, Roiling Vortex for the aggressive matchups, Unlicensed Hearse in here for graveyard hate, and then Kolaghan's Command for the grind your elements. I actually want to do a split and play 1 Bitter Blossom. I want to try to like that. I mostly want to play Bitter Blossom, if I'm honest, so I'm going to try that. The other card that we could try out for this is Molten Collapse. I don't think that's a terrible idea, and actually, I think I'm going to play Molten Collapse over Bitter Triumph. Collapse. Can I not spell? Molten. So this just has some other upside. I think we try it like that. So we'll give that a go. Alrighty. Then we go to Timeless Titan. So you can build like an Uro, Oko, Primeval Titan, Omnath, 4-color, Money Pile, Field of the Dead deck. What I wanted to try out first was Indomitable Creativity into Primeval Titan. So we are playing 30 lands in this 60-card deck. We make tokens with both Fable the Mirrorbreaker as well as Oko to get you some value there. Have both Lightning Bolt and Unholy Heat as removal, Memory Lapse, and Growth Spiral for early interaction. So it's really just focused on trying to get out that Primeval Titan. Then just a bunch of different lands that can be used in the deck, including Thespian Stage to copy the Field of the Dead. The one card I do want to try out, and I'm actually going to play it instead of the basic Mountain. I want a Myrex in here. I think Myrex fetching against Control could be reasonable, plus it makes tokens for Indomitable Creativity. My sideboard approach for this one is Graveyard Hate, cheap counters with Dispute. In heavy, I think I'm going to, in some cases, board out of the Creativity, especially against Control and stuff like that. So then I want to bring in Uro. Uro is also very good against aggressive decks. You don't want to play Uro and Titan in the main board because then it screws up your Creativity. Shark Typhoon, Chandra for heavy counterspell matchups, Brotherhood's End as sweepers. And then just for like when I need artifact and enchantment removal, just playing Visages as a way to channel and then blow up it up. And then they happen to be lands as well for utility. So kind of have that one there. And then lastly, this was one of the ones I had the most fun with. No Ban Storm. So I think this is better in best of 1. Probably get hated out in best of 3, but you're using Necropotence in conjuncture with Bolas's Citadel. So with Bolas's Citadel, basically what you do, you can play cards off the top of your library. Necropotence, you can pay life to exile the top card of your library. So kind of clears the top of your library from lands and stuff like that. It also just lets you refill your hand. And what you're trying to do is play a bunch of cheap spells, Bone Saws, Baubles. I don't know why it's at 3 Baubles. Bone Saws, Baubles, Ornithopters, the Shambling Ghast, which I mentioned in the creature video, gives -1/1 and then creates a treasure, so some utility, Dark Ritual, so you can go like, technically you could turn 2 win in this deck if you get really lucky, turn 2 Dark Ritual into Bolas's Citadel, if you have 2 of these in Citadel in hand. Deadly Dispute, sacks get you, basically it's Defying Lands to ramp you up and then to kind of go from there. Witherbloom Apprentice, every time you cast an instant or sorcery, you gain and drain. This helps you offset the damage from the Citadel or Necropotence. It counts every copy of Storm. So if you Storm with Weather the Storm for 10, this drains you for 10. It drains the opponent for 10. You gain 10, plus then you gain 30 life. So you just kind of keep playing these things, play Weather the Storm, gain a whole bunch of life. So you could either win with like any Storm amounts with Witherbloom Apprentices, or you can do Tendrils of Agony to Storm out on your opponent as well. Playing 4 Swamps in here to play around Blood Moon decks in the in that event as well. So I think this is more of a best of 1 deck, all things considered. So that's it as a starting point. I know I'm going to do Tainted Pact. I'm going to do like a Teamer, Delver, no Delver deck. I think I might try to do Black-White kind of Hate Bears maybe to see with that. But let me know what other decks you have in mind, things you're considering. I might do like Gruul Midrange, but I think Gruul Midrange is probably just better off as Teamer, to be honest. But let me know what you think, what decks you want to see, and I'll try to do at least one more video of this ahead of the time, and then we'll start running out gameplay as soon as we have a chance when it comes out on Tuesday. In any case, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one. Stay safe out there.